Blyle?
Yes.
Dobevic?
Yes.
Fasella?
Aye.
Friedman?
Aye.
Barnes?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next on the agenda is audience participation, and I see we have some guests in our audience that would like to address the board. If anyone would like to speak, please approach the podium, state your name and address. It's an opportunity to make a statement to the Board of Trustees as a whole. We do not answer questions. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, first time. Kenyon Civil's professional address, okay? 2212 North Market Street, representing the Salvation Army, and just wanted to address you all and say thank you. First of all, thank you for having us, the opportunity to share, and then secondly, thank you for the consideration. We have been in conversation with some of you all in the room and some who are not in the room regarding some proposed changes that would strongly impact a number of our personnel. For those of you who, from our perspective at least, and I don't know who has said what to anyone, so this might be repeat. Currently, the yellow and red bus lines go in front of our building on Market Street, where we serve some of the most vulnerable in Champaign County. And then behind us is the Pregnancy Resource Center, who serve an equally vulnerable population, some of which take the bus. Today's a beautiful day. However, the proposed changes would vastly impact folks, you know, when it's 95 degrees or it's 10 degrees, when sidewalks are icy, folks who are in wheelchairs, who have mobility issues, folks who, we have one gentleman who has been in our veteran shelter, who, when we shared the proposed changes, he stated, "Man, I can't see that far." And so just hopefully wanted you to hear that perspective. We appreciate the concern that you all have for the community, for the folks in the community, for the ridership of MTD, and we don't discount that. Certainly from the Salvation Army perspective, from the Salvation Army perspective, from the Pregnancy Resource Center perspective, our folks are resilient, and they're strong, they're hardworking, and they do their best. And one of the things that we work tirelessly for is to remove obstacles from them. And so us being here, we wanted to advocate on their behalf that MTD, on the proposed changes, that they would be reconsidered, that they would be redrawn, that they would not go through as you guys have proposed them because of the detriment that it would have on that vulnerable population. So thank you very much.
Next, Jennifer.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Valade. I'm the Director of Veterans Services for the Salvation Army. The population that we serve are veterans who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. This population does not have the resources to be able to have their own vehicles. Often they have to rely on public transportation. I want to just continue on with what the captain said of how important this is to them. It's not just about getting to the Salvation Army. It's about getting to a job if they have a job to go to. It's about getting to other resources in the community. It's about them being able to become self-sufficient again. I've read your mission statement. I know ours. And it's quite unique that they can really support one another in the mission. You get to provide a service that promotes accessibility for individuals. We provide a service, a meeting the needs of those that are the most vulnerable. And unfortunately, this plan to remove both routes, not one, but both routes, impacts your ability to fulfill your mission as well as ours. And at the end of the day, these aren't individuals that have other resources. They don't have a car sitting in their parking lot or in their garage that they can use, and they're just using this out of a resource. This is out of a necessity. I would encourage you to really think through the population you're serving, not the dollars, not the mall, but the population that will be impacted by these decisions. Because they rely on you, they rely on us, and many other agencies to survive. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Payton. I work with the Salvation Army and for the Salvation Army, and also for the veterans in our area. I am a veteran myself, and unfortunately, I'm walking with a cane. Now, if you multiply that times our veterans, some of our veterans have an inability to transport themselves. They have an inability to even get on the bus without assistance. So if you look at it from the standpoint of need and servicing our community, we have a lot of veterans who need that kind of service. And taking away the routes would definitely inhibit them from getting where they need services. I'm a case manager for the veterans, and I see these veterans on a regular weekly basis. They tell me about their trials and the difficulties they have getting from one point A to point B. And the unit, MTD services, they help them to get to the hospital. They help them to get to a job. And without that, it's going to be extremely difficult for them. Thank you very much for your time and listening to me.
Thank you. Are there any more comments to be made? Okay, thank you for the comments, all of you. Moving on, is there a motion to approve the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board Meetings minutes from April 30th, 2025, open session?
So moved. Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, we'll move on to communications. Are there any communications from the board? Hearing none, next is the Managing Director's report. Carl?
Thank you. Good afternoon. This report is based on April statistics. April was quite a month, and this has been quite a year so far, as you'll see. The April ridership reached 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million, which is a 15.8% increase compared to April of last year. That is also a 6% increase compared to April of 2019, which was the last April that we had pre-pandemic. So That's significant. That is that's a 6% is a dramatic increase over a pre-pandemic number. So lots of hard work from our operations and maintenance teams, customer service, and everybody. But it's paying off, and ridership is really rebounding. The FY 2025 year-to-date ridership is 10.2 million, which is an 18.9% increase over last year. And just some fun facts. So keep that 10.2 million in mind. In FY 2024, last year, the year-to-date ridership through April was 8.6 million. So we've jumped from 8.6 to 10.2. And the FY 2019, keeping in mind that that's pre-pandemic, was at 10.5 million. So only 300,000 rides more than what we just had last April. Very significant. So moving on, I think the next chart, we've got the monthly ridership for the last several years. You can see in orange the pre-pandemic number, and then that 6% increase with the 2025 over 2019. Okay, moving on to the next page. The paper packet that you have in front of you, there's an error on the page, so you got a single sheet in front of you, and we have updated the packet on the website, so all the information has been corrected. But moving on to revenue, April 2025 operating revenue was 0.5% below April 2024, and year-to-date operating revenue was 0.1% above FY 2024. And as I've mentioned for seems like just about the last year, most of that shrinkage is due to interest rates coming down, and so our investment revenue is not as robust as it was a year ago or 2 years ago. The operating expenses, April 2025 operating expenses were 3.5% above April of 2024, and year-to-date operating expenses were 6.2% above FY 2024. And April of last year, we were only at like a 82% service level, and we're now at a 100% service level. So that's primarily the difference between inflation. The year-to-date revenue and expenses, our year-to-date operating revenues were $2 million above budget, while operating expenses were $3.2 million below budget. And with that, if I could ask our new Assistant Safety and Training Director to step up. His name is Kurt Buckley, and he just started with us a few weeks ago, and so I wanted to give him an opportunity to introduce himself to you. We're quite excited that Kurt has joined us. So Kurt, just hit the button on the right there. Yes.
Hi, thanks for having me. Like Carl said, my name is Kurt Buckley, and earlier this month I retired across the street from the Champaign Police Department. I'm really excited to be here at MTD. The majority of my career at the police department, I was involved in the training division, first as a field trainer, and then as a supervisor, and when I retired, I led the field training unit at CPD. So again, I'm very thankful to be here and ready to get to work.
All right, thank you, Kurt.
You got it.
See, can you hit that button again? Appreciate it. All right, so I'm trying to keep this short so that we can move on to the discussion about the service. But I'll take any questions that you might have through page 35 of the board packet. So let me know if you have any questions. Okay.
Okay, let's move on now to action items. We'll be discussing, as Carl said, the proposed changes for the 25-26 service year. Carl, do you have some preliminary comments?
I do have a few preliminary comments, and Amy and Jay are moving up here so that we can have a complete conversation about this. I guess primarily I want to say in particular to our guests, but to the members of the public that might be watching this too. The aspect of the service changes for the fall that we're talking about are relative to service on North Market Street. And this is a situation that was the whole cloth creation of Marketplace, not MTD, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that, because MTD is very sympathetic and empathetic towards Salvation Army and the other entities in that Market and Wilbur area. We did not desire to remove any service from there, but we were handed a situation from Marketplace where we could not utilize their property to turn the buses around. So getting a bus to Salvation Army isn't a problem, but getting a bus back from Salvation Army for it to continue on service for the rest of the community, that was the challenge. Having said that, we recognize that it leaves Salvation Army and the Pregnancy Resource Center in a lurch, and the nearest stop they have is within a quarter of a mile. And in the world of transit, a quarter mile is normally viewed as being a normal walking distance to a bus stop, but in this particular case, we absolutely acknowledge that this is an at-risk population for these entities, and their clients, their customers, their guests, on the whole, will find it difficult to navigate that quarter of a mile. So we took another stab at trying to come up with some alternatives for service to that area, and we wanted to give them to you. I want to give a shout out in this case. We went to the city of Champaign to talk to them about one of the options that we were really prevented from doing the first time we looked at this because of parking that is on one of the roads that Jay will go into detail on, but there was parking on a road that essentially made that road a one-lane road. And when we have buses coming from both sides, or a bus and a car coming from the opposing direction, we would not be able to traverse that road, so we avoided that. We went out to the city to talk to them about that, and I really want you guys, you folks, to understand that the city really came through, and if there's a hero in this story, it's the city of Champaign, because they're willing to take parking, remove all parking along that street, so that makes that a very viable option for us that Jay will lay out to you. It has some trade-offs, and so this is what we want you to wrestle with, some of the trade-offs between that and another option. But I think that we can provide service to Salvation Army one way or the other, and so we're just looking for input from you on which of those ways we go. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Jay to show you what the options are. And we'll have, if you look up on the screens, you'll see some maps when Jay's at that point. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Jay Rank, Operations Director. So yeah, this started off, we had a public hearing on May 8th, as we always do, with proposed service changes. A lot of times, they're not controversial, and we show the public, they get feedback, and we move on with our plans as we propose them. This year, given the circumstance with them all, it became more controversial because there aren't a lot of great options for us to navigate up on North Market. There's only a few streets that we can get east-west on, and we basically have to make trade-offs on what we can serve, how and when. Every mile that we drive costs a time, and we have to look at ridership and the service and what and kind of what the trade-off is from a routing perspective and the service and what is where, and yeah, try to make adjustments that are, on the whole, the best for the community. But there's no right or wrong answers, and in some cases there's winners and losers. The case that we presented, we knew the Salvation Army and the Pregnancy Resource Centers would be the loser in the situation, but on the whole, we felt pretty good about the benefits of the proposed route. So. I'll walk through kind of where we are now, our proposal, and then we have two alternative options. So, tech services. Okay, great. So our current routing is something we've been doing since August of 2020. This uses marketplace property. We've been serving the mall since the 70s, and most recently changed in 2020 to not use the southern half of the outer drive. We enter and exit off of Market at their request to try to be, good partners. We understand, the more we're on their pavement, the more we affect it. So we compromised and created this routing, and which basically has us go Market, northbound Market to Anthony to Neal to Market View, take a left on Market, and enter Marketplace North entrance. This is not an ideal route because there's a difficult left-hand turn on Market View to Market, but we do so again as a compromise. So that's kind of where we stand right now and until August. Next slide, please. So we proposed a change which would address that left-hand turn from Market View to Market. Basically, it would revert back to our old routing, which took Market View westbound, and we would head up Neal. Now, since we wouldn't be going on Marketplace property, we were planning on staying at Neal, have the mall stop at Neal and Center, and then continue on to, Prospect area, the Meijer, the Walmart, and all of that over there. Really, I think the most beneficial piece of this is that we elected to take our diversions to Apollo using the yellow route instead of the red, which is currently on, and it's at the end of the route. So basically, anybody that needs to go there. Or anybody that doesn't need to go there doesn't need to go there. Basically, you wouldn't have to ride around the diversion unless you needed to go there, because the bus will come to Walmart, it'll go up to Apollo, and then come back to Walmart. So that was really attractive. And we found a way to make the timings work and match about what we're doing right now. As you can see, the X'd out parts of the map is where we're not serving, and yes, Salvation Army, Pregnancy Resource Center, Wilbur Heights, all on Market Street, wouldn't be served by anything north of Market View, which is, yeah, like Carl said, about a quarter mile from where we would be turning left. So between all of the trade-offs, that was what we proposed. And yeah, we took it to the public meeting, and yeah, Salvation Army came out and made their case of why, they deserve service. we said, okay, we'll look into this. We'll take it back. You know, we only have a few weeks or so before we need to make decisions to get our schedule book ready and things like that. So we're on a tight timeline, but we, you know, kind of we took a look at our options, and really, I would say, you know, Market View is a good road for us to use east-west. What's not shown on this map is Twins and Wood Duck, which was not a consideration initially because Carl talked about the parking. Interstate does not go through to Market, and the next road we can use is Olympian. So having not very many good options, you know, this is what we proposed. So next slide, please. Okay. So, yeah, Carl reached out to the city of Champaign and talked about the parking on Twins. And like he said, it was busy. There's a semi-truck that parks there sometimes, and having buses go in each direction on every half hour was going to be an issue for us. It's a concrete road, but yeah, there is two 90-degree turns on Wood Duck, between Wood Duck and Twins, which, you know, we don't love, but I think we can do. But yeah, parking was primarily the issue. This option uses Wood Duck instead of Market View, and this also then has our diversion up to Apollo mid-route. So basically the trade-off would be anybody that's on the bus that doesn't need to go you know, to Apollo would be on, you know, for 6 or 8 minutes on a diversion that they don't need to go to, but in order to get the service further up north on Market, this is the trade-off that we would make. And then basically the route would go northbound Market to Mercury, turn around at Apollo, come back down, and then take a right on Wood Duck, and then come up to Twins to Neal, take a left on Neal, and take a right on Town Center, and it would basically be back to where we would have our regular route. So the drawback of this is there's no service on Market View, you know, at Coles and at Market View Center, which has very good ridership there. So essentially we would be trading off regular service on Market for no service on Market View and a short diversion for Apollo. We're talking about weekday daytime routing here. This would likely introduce a difference between our weekday daytime routing and our evening and weekend routing, because I don't think we would use Twins or Wood Duck in the evening or weekend. I think we would use Market View. So we would be introducing a you know, difference between our routings, just FYI.
Because those resources aren't open on the
weekend. Yeah. As Amy just pointed out, yeah, we're comfortable doing that because, yeah, on Market Street, Salvation Army Pregnancy Resources Center is not open on the weekends. Okay, next slide, please. So our other alternative would be to use Market View as initially proposed, but take the diversion up to Apollo on a mid-route so that there would be service on Market on a limited basis north of Market View. We'd be basically having anybody that was on the bus take this 8 to 10 minute diversion mid-route before coming back down to Market View to Neal and continuing on. So the benefit is that, you know, there would be some service on Market and we'd still be serving Apollo, but yeah, with the drawback of a longer diversion. So that's basically the trade-off is the limited service on Market compared to regular service on Market View. in a longer mid-route diversion. So for reference, there's 24 northbound trips, 25 southbound weekday trips. And yeah, on average, there's typically, on average, there's 8.7 people on board. So between those 24 or 25 trips a day, 8.7 people, multiply that out. So we're talking about that much time, people time is being invested in a diversion like that. Okay, I think I covered everything, except I guess I should point out the Department of Human Services also moved their offices recently. They are west of Neal on Anthony, so this option gets us closer to them as well. None of these options have that difficult left turn from Market View to Market, which is good. And then, yeah, this case, it serves the mall on Neal Street opposed to, primarily on Neal Street opposed to on Market, whereas the Wood Duck Twins option has the service to the mall on Market, just pointing out the differences. So I'm happy to take any questions about these proposals.
Phil. Yeah, thank you, Jay, for putting a lot of thought into this. I guess two questions for you. So first one would be, how exactly are we turning these buses around on Apollo Drive?
Yeah, there's a storage building back, on the north side that we go behind onto private property, but turn it around in the back of their parking lot where the trucks deliver. So we do that right now with the red route.
Okay.
So that wouldn't be a change.
And then I'm sure there's a rationale to this. I'm not as familiar with the scheduling as you guys are. Is there a reason that we need to backtrack on Wood Duck? So I understand you go northbound on Market or vice versa, cut over on Wood Duck, now you're north of the mall, come back down, and then we're looping around the Aldi store in Meyer.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why on the southbound trip you couldn't cut, let's say, down Neal Street and then hit your Market View on the southbound?
Yeah, I mean, making big loops basically at the end of a route makes it difficult for some people to get to their location. They might have to, say, for example, take the entire route south to go back north in order to loop back around. So, yeah, for the most part, we try to keep the route kind of northbound and southbound on the same roads with a small loop at the end, or ideally a nice place for us to turn around so that you don't have a situation where, if you got on, someplace that the bus took an hour and a half to get back to, your other location. So that's primarily why we wouldn't want to do that.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah.
Go ahead, George.
Do you have a preference that you would advise between these two alternatives?
Yeah, between these two proposals, I prefer the Market View option pretty strongly.
The second one?
Yeah. Or the fourth one we talked about, yeah.
Is it possible to get these back up on the...
Do you want to say that?
Yeah, Tech, can you put the slides, only one at a time, but the last two slides?
Jay, can you tell us your thoughts, why you prefer the Market View over the Wood Duck?
Yeah, I prefer Market View because it does serve Market View, which has a lot of commercial activity there. It does get some trips on Market, and yeah, as of right now, I failed to mention, we take 8 trips a day up to Apollo and FedEx. We could look at adding a few more in the midday to kind of even out to make it so that, there's not these huge gaps between for, the Salvation Army Pregnancy Resource Center, so that they'd have more regular service in the day, and maybe that's a good compromise. But yeah, I don't like, Twins and Wood Duck in that, primarily the stop for the mall would be on Market. And I don't like that we'd be missing a large chunk of Neal Street, including the Department of Human Services as well. So I think, on the balance, again, and I don't believe there's a right or wrong answer, because it's overall just a judgment of, who benefits from the community wide. But yeah, those are the reasons I prefer that.
And I guess just to really quickly, it's important to note that when Jay points out that the Wood Duck option puts the entrance to the mall stop on Market Street, then people would need to then cross, and then they're coming in pretty far from the entrance. But the preferred option of Market View would have that stop at that Neal and Center Drive, which is where that stoplight is. So it's a bit more of a controlled intersection. It's close to that Macy's door, so people can still have access. Not that we're in the, business of encouraging service to the mall, but that is where people will still go.
And that is Market Street is very difficult to get a gap in traffic because the closest signal to the south, I believe, is Bradley Avenue, so the traffic becomes very spaced out rather than coming in waves. So, we don't want somebody playing Frogger trying to get out across traffic if there's not good lighting. That could really end badly.
Can I see the other alternative? That one. Those two streets with the dog leg, are those the streets that you say the city is willing to drop parking?
Yeah, there's no parking on Wood Duck, which is kind of the portion to the east with the 90-degree, but on Twins, there is parking on the south side. So they would have to do some work to get that taken care of by August when we would need it, but they've indicated that they're willing to.
Other questions or discussion? Is there a motion regarding this proposed changes?
I just want to say that from my point of view, both of those are acceptable. Either of them is acceptable. And I know you've done an awful lot of work to come up with even those two. But what's not acceptable is the original proposal.
Sorry, George, can you repeat just the last part of what you said? You acknowledged that Jay's team did a lot of work, and then, sorry, what did you say?
I said, the last part of what I said was that I don't think the original proposal in this area was acceptable.
Yeah, I think we all acknowledge that we're moving away from the initial proposal. So we're really hoping to get input from you collectively on which of the two new proposals you have a preference for.
Do I have a motion? Go ahead, Phil.
I guess if this is up to us, I might ask a little more information on how the limited service diversion stuff works. You said we'd be only doing it a limited number of periods a day. I reckon we'd probably try to figure out something to do with FedEx's shift changes, though they mostly work at night, and there's super value up there too, I guess. But My other question would be, is it the kind of thing where the bus driver might call out and say, is there anybody that needs this diversion, or are we also diverting to pick people up so we can't do that? Do they divert both north and south? How does that all work?
Yeah, the route, the diversions have been set in the past to match the shift changes. So yeah, what we proposed is a 6:48, a 7:23, 7:53, 8:33 a.m., and then a 1:03, 2:33, 4:03, 5:33 p.m. Trip. So note that there's a gap between 8:33 and 1:03. So we could fill that in to make it more acceptable. But yeah, I envision this as a northbound diversion only, and come back down, and then go back up, and then coming southbound, it would basically go Neal to Market View to Market and head towards Bradley.
Laura.
Sorry, real quick, Phil, you kind of inserted in there too the possibility of making it almost like on call to make
I
that.
just didn't know how it worked. I don't think it works like that from what you're saying.
Yeah, no, that's not what we're proposing here, and that does cause difficulty. If it's not scheduled to go on that, and then somebody is on the other portion of the route expecting the bus to be there, but they're, somebody says they want to go north then this person is left standing out in the cold or standing out in the heat for 10, 12 minutes because they don't know when the bus is going to be there. So that would be challenging. Sorry, Laura.
Laura?
Oh, it's okay. Jay, so do I understand this correctly that if we elect to go with the Market View option, then we wouldn't have two different routes for weekday and weekend?
Correct, yeah.
Any further discussion? Bill?
Yeah, obviously, public participation is limited, but since we've got these guys here, it might be interesting to know if those times are actually, the proposed, we have 8 time slots. Does that mesh with what these organizations are generally doing?
I know that it does not. We met with them, and yeah, I think they said that the open from 8 or 9 a.m. to 3:30 or so, and yeah, there's a large gap in between what we're currently offering. So that's why I offered to have a few trips in there to kind of fill it in.
And how long did they say, generally speaking, the clients are there? Is it something where you stop by for a half an hour, you're there for 8 hours? What are we dealing with?
Do you want to open it up to them?
Dick, if you want to ask Captain Civils to come up and maybe
Captain Kenyon?
Participate.
While he approaches the microphone, I just want to add on to what Jay say. I do think that these times would serve some of their needs, but that gap, and depending on the services, so it doesn't serve all of their needs, but I think staff believes that it serves some.
If I understood the question correct, yeah, so Jay was correct. On Mondays, our hours of operation are 9 to 5, and then Tuesday through Friday is 9 to 3:30. So, yeah, we get a good chunk in the morning, so I think you said 8:30 or so, around that time, and I would imagine I guess that second option, how that would be presented, we'd have a number there, but yeah, we do have a number throughout the day who do come. So in terms of, I think, Mr. Fischella, without those intermittent ones in the middle of the day, that would be tough. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Helps a little bit, thank you.
Anything further? Okay, do we have a motion? Does anybody have a motion that you would like to introduce?
It doesn't seem like anybody is I mean, if I'm reading the room right, I don't think any of us is super comfortable making a set-in-stone declaration right now. I don't know if it would be possible for us to direct Jay to hammer down what, obviously you put more time into this than anybody, and I think you understand it more than anybody. It might be something where, are we able to, and this question maybe for Carl or for Alex, are we able to direct staff to, tweak this and pick what they think is the best solution? I don't want to make a motion. I mean, I'll leave that up to you guys.
We'll take whatever direction you're willing to give, and we'll try to do the best with that that we can. We're trying to make the best stone soup that we can with the ingredients that we've been given by Marketplace. And so neither of these options is perfect, and we acknowledge that, and I certainly think Salvation Army would acknowledge that, but this is the situation that has been foisted upon us. And so whatever kind of direction you can give us, because Jay identified some trade-offs for you between these two proposals, and so neither of them is perfect. And so we very much want to hear from you what trade-offs you are most willing to make.
I don't feel that I have the operating expertise to make a choice between the two. I would be perfectly willing to leave it to staff to pick the one that you all, under Carl, think is best and go with it. I will only ask one thing. Captain, do you have any problem with either of those two? I mean, between the two?
I remember the question from before. The average time that some of our guests spend, it varies. We've had folks who've come to the pantry and they're in and out in 5 minutes on a slower day. We have folks who come for a veterans appointment who they're there for 2 hours. And some of our other programs. So short, long, and everything in between. To your question, you all know far more than I do. Certainly want to acknowledge and appreciate the work that you guys have put into this. Yeah, without any specific knowledge, we're appreciative of the consideration. I'm not a board member, so I don't know that I would feel comfortable saying what I would do or not. But I don't want to take the out and say Jay, but I know what I would prefer. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you want my opinion, I'll give it. Probably the market view. So I guess it'd be alternative option 2, I think, which I believe Jay said that's his preferred, and it makes sense to me with my very, very limited knowledge. So to give you a simple answer, the second one probably in line with what Jay said.
Any further questions, comments? Do we have anyone willing to make a motion?
Dick, I was just going to add that I think Mr. Friedman asked for what staff recommended, and I think Jay said it pretty clearly that he recommends the market view option. So I would be comfortable making a motion to accept the market view option.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is this a roll call? Yeah, will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle?
Yes.
DeBevick? Yes. Fasella?
Aye.
Friedman?
Yes.
Barnes?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, next is the fiscal year 2026 draft budget presentation.
Yeah, just real briefly, if I can, just to button that all down, I just want to say two things. One, we really appreciate the Salvation Army, not only what they do, but their whole perspective on this. They, for an entity who essentially had their bus stop removed out in front, right out in front of their place, and reduced service, they have been very good to work with. They've been very understanding of the situation, and so I appreciate that. And then the second thing, I just want to reiterate again, because this was, you know, municipal government sometimes it gets a bad name, maybe fairly, maybe unfairly in different circumstances, but I just want to acknowledge, even though we're not taking them up on this now based on the option that was chosen, I really want to acknowledge that the city of Champaign, you know, cities don't move very quickly for a reason, and mostly for a good reason, because they're very deliberative in what they do. But the city of Champaign really got on this, being willing to take this action in removing the parking on Twins Drive. So I just want to say that publicly, that we appreciate that, and we appreciate them as well. Okay, moving on to the budget then. And I will try to keep this a little shorter than usual, given that discussion. So I like to start out with a budget presentation, just reminding everybody that a budget is a plan, and it's not something that is set in stone. It is, it contains a lot of variables and questions and things that we don't know. And so we do the best that we can, and we plan in the best way that we can. But sometimes we bob left, and sometimes we veer right, and changes will occur along the way. I guess this year, more than any other year maybe, we've got variables that we've never encountered before, with questions with federal funding, questions with state funding, and so to some degree we're just kind of moving forward, not with blinders on. We very much are keeping our fingers on the pulses of these questions, but there are questions about the larger funding canopy that we operate under, and so while we're watching those, we don't have any definitive information as we sit here talking about the budget for fiscal year 2026. So we are moving ahead with the presumption that we will have access to the funds that we have had in the past and that we expect to continue to have. So we can have a conversation about that, but I just want to say that up front, that there are questions. So, tech services, if you want to pull up that first page, yes. On this page, I want to highlight that overall, when you look at this, it gets there are some eye-popping numbers on here. You can see the total appropriations goes from 57 to 84 million. I'll explain that as we move into the depths of this. That's not a real expectation, but I promise I will explain why it looks that way. What I do want to direct your attention to, I think if you move on to the next slide, yeah, the operating expenses, that's really the nut that we're here to crack open. And so that's a 4% increase from 54.9 million to 57.3 million. Overall, our operating budget, the budget that we use to put our service out on the street, that's a 4% increase. So that to me is the main takeaway from this slide. And of course, feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions, or at the end of it we can come back and talk about any points that you want to. But that's my takeaway there. The other thing I want to point out is, yes, the debt, whoops, we had it, there we go. The debt service line item, that also looks like a big jump. Looks that way because it is a big jump. The reason that line item jumps like that is because it's what we affectionately call a lumpy line item. It's not something that we do, you know, the thing that line item pays for, we don't do it year in and year out. Those are big projects that we do, and that debt service is the funding mechanism within our operating grant with the state that allows us to borrow money from a bank to do a project, and then the principal and interest on that borrowed money is an eligible operating expense. So that debt service line item is for some big projects, and we'll highlight those projects later on in the budget. But that's normal. Some years it'll go up because we're doing a big project, and then some years it will go down because we're not doing a big project. This year is a little particularly quirky because we actually have a project that is reflected in the budget twice. And again, I'll highlight it for you later, but it's reflected twice because we know we can fund it one way, and debt service is that one way, but we are applying for funds to fund it a different way because we can get more grant dollars to pay for it, and so that it would have less of an impact on local dollars that would have to go into that project. So we're actually required to show that the project is in the budget, and so we've reflected it twice. We won't do the project twice. There will not be double payments for this. None of that money is going into Dick Barnes's checking account. It's all on the up and up, and we'll clarify this as we, I'm kidding, Dick. I'm not kidding that it won't go into your bank account, but I'm kidding, I'm picking on you. We'll clarify this as we get answers from the grant programs on what grant awards we get, then we'll let you know that it'll be in one program or the other, and the other one will drop off. Okay, enough of that. We can move on to the next slide. This one is our estimate of revenues and expenses. And here, you can see that we start out with a $6 million cash on hand. That is a rough estimate because it changes on a day-to-day basis, but that's a rough estimate that will start the year out with that much in our operating reserve at the start of the fiscal year. And then you can see that we have, I think if you go to the, push the next button, Tech, yeah, if you compare the revenues of $90.5 million to the expenses of $84.7 million, this is not a deficit budget. It's a budget that we are covering our expenses, our operating expenses with our operating revenues. And so as a board member, that should be one big thing that you look at, that you want to see how that happens. And then you can see at the bottom of the page the ending balance with the operating. We end up with a $6 million reserve, again, our cash on hand, our operating reserve. And so that is healthy. All right, moving on to the next slide. Sorry, I highlighted the cash on hand starting and ending. All right, this is our operations department budget. No, it isn't, sorry. I jumped ahead. This is just a snapshot of our capital projects. And again, we'll go into the specific capital projects toward the end of this presentation. But you can see that, again, if we get the grants that we're applying for, we have the money to do the projects. If we don't get the grants, then we either won't do the project or we will fund it in another manner. And as those projects come up, we will bring those to you, and you will have the opportunity to vote on whether or not you want to, what bucket you want to pay for the project out of, or not do the project. But a budget is a plan, and so right now the plan is for these grant programs, and so it's reflected as the revenue paying for the expenses. Okay, now we can move on to the operations department. Operations is our largest department. It has the most employees, it has the most vehicles, it has the most liability that for what we do. So it really, pardon the pun, but drives everything that we do. And when you see a bus going down the street, 75% of the cost of that bus driving down that street is in the employee driving that bus. So the cost of the vehicle gets spread out all over the life of the bus, but in any given hour of that bus being in service, 75% of that cost is in operations, and so that is why this is the heftiest of our departments when it comes to the budget. In fact, I wrote myself a little note to remind you, me to tell you that the operations department budget is 51% of our entire budget. So that tells you the scope and scale of that department. On this section of the operations department, I mean, barring any questions, I really don't have anything to point out, because the wages and fringe benefits are driven by our COLA, the cost of living adjustment that we've agreed to with our employees, which, by the way, is 3.5% in FY 2026. So that's across the board. All employees will receive a 3.5% increase. And so when you look at the wages and the salaries, the wages, the fringe benefits, that drives all of that. Tech, you can move on to the next screen. All right, here, actually go ahead and move on to the next one too. Oh, nope, sorry, go back. I thought I highlighted something there. No, I didn't. Okay, so you can see the overall budget for the operations department moves from 32.9 million to 33.7 million. That is a 2% increase. So that's significant that the largest department, the department that makes up 51% of our entire budget, that department is only moving up 2%. And you may ask, how is it only moving up 2% when you're doing a 3.5% COLA with your employees for wages, salaries, and benefits? And that would be a great question. Some of that is because there are some line items that we actually have reduced. We've kind of right-sized some other line items that we're just not seeing the same amount of activity that we used to 4 or 5 years ago, and so we're downsizing some of those line items, and so at the end of it all, the bottom line for the budget is for that department budget is a 2% increase. Okay, Tech next. Maintenance department, that is our second largest department, as you can imagine. They have the second largest number of employees, they have the second largest number of vehicles, and they have the second largest amount of liability for putting our service out on the street. You can see that, again, the wages, salaries, the fringe benefits, those are all really in line with the COLA percentage. And so that 3.5% goes through every department. There's not much notable here except one thing. If you want to move on to the next slide, if you look at the other materials and supplies consumed line item there at the bottom of materials and supplies consumed, that line item goes from $199,000 to $954,000. So without that line item, the maintenance department would also see about a 2% increase. With this line item, this department is seeing a 7% increase. Quick explanation on what's happening here with this line item. There are two projects that we are undertaking. One of them we've actually already begun, but both of them should be completed next year. But they're operating expenses. They're kind of capital-like projects that impact the entire fleet of vehicles that we have, but they're being paid for out of this line item in the operating budget. They qualify for an expensable line item, and so the state grant will help pay for them because the dollar threshold per vehicle is under the $10,000 capitalization threshold. And so the two projects are, one, a fleet-wide upgrade to the vehicle connectivity. So in other words, you all are aware that we have this real-time information that we push out to Google and to the transit app and to our website, and so anybody can find out using their device exactly when the bus will be departing a specific location. That data has to go back and forth between vehicles all day long. It's a lot. And since we've implemented that technology, we've used a data radio, which is a UHF radio frequency, and we're moving away from the data radio to cellular. And we're doing it for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons that we're doing it is that moving to cellular will allow us to do more with it. The bandwidth of the data radio is very, very small. It's very constricted, and so we're quite limited in what we can transmit, the data packets that we can transmit back and forth from a vehicle to our control center. With cellular, it just opens the door wide for us to do new things, like we can, when there's a reroute, something that happens, a water main breaks, or there's an accident or whatever, and something just happens suddenly. Right now, when we have to put a route on reroute, none of our real-time information reflects that. No one actually at an intersection with their device in their hand knows that bus might not come to that spot because it's being rerouted around there, unless they go and look on our website. But with this new vehicle connectivity, our control center can immediately put in what the reroute is into our system. That'll get pushed out to all the vehicles, all the apps, everything. And so in real time, somebody will get the information of, oh, that bus isn't coming to location A, it's coming to location B. I need to move one block over and still catch my bus. And so it's much more robust and better information for our passengers. That's just an easy example, but I think a really great one for why we want to do this project. The other one is, and this is the one that we've already begun, we've started to replace our, sorry, did you have a question? Okay. We've started to replace our 25 and 30-year-old fare boxes on our system. The manufacturer of those fare boxes has sunset that equipment. They don't make the parts for them anymore, and we have pretty much exhausted eBay in getting parts for these old fare boxes, and so we are buying in relatively small lumps fare boxes for our maintenance department to install on vehicles. We generally are buying 10 to 15 at a time because there's actually a surprising amount of work involved with installing a new one, and so the tech technology technicians in the maintenance department, they can only do so many vehicles in a year. So we'll do 10 or 15. As we take those old ones out, then we have spares, so that if, as we still have old ones in service, they break down, now we have spare parts. So we can keep the old ones going longer, and we are using less of them because we get new ones in. So you'll see that probably for a couple of years as we slowly replace those. So sorry, that was a lot. Any questions on maintenance or those two projects? All right, moving on, tech. Oh yeah, there I highlighted that line item. Okay, moving on to administration. This is our third largest department in terms of people and expenses. And I think we can move through this fairly quickly. I just want to point out one thing on this screen. I think if you go to the next slide, yeah, there you go. You'll see a relatively jump there. This stands out within the department budget. This is, we've talked about how we are replacing, we're out to bid right now. In fact, we just have received the proposals, and they're being evaluated right now for replacement software for all our back office functions, our general ledger and work orders and accounts payable, accounts receivable, all that good stuff. That's a really robust system that all the different departments that we have use. And you know, the world has changed, and it's no longer where you just buy something and then you get to use it until you can't anymore. Now you have to buy something, and you get to have the privilege of making an annual payment for to license that, to use it for every year that you have it. And so you can thank Adobe and Microsoft for that, but that's kind of the world we live in now. And so this line item reflects that new annual payment that we'll be making for this new software. Overall, this budget, primarily because of that, and primarily because, or secondarily because insurance costs are going up. Tech, I think you can move on to the next slide. Yeah. This budget, 9.1 to 9.8 million, that's an 8% increase, and that is primarily because of increased insurance costs and the enterprise software. So any questions about administration? All right. Moving on to Illinois Terminal, which is our fourth and final department. That's the building that you sit in right now, and they do a lot, but they do it very effectively. This overall budget is a 3% increase. They are very cost conscious here in this building, and they constrain their costs. So Tech, you can move on to the next screen. Here we move from 1.837 million to 1.894 million. So that's a 3% increase. All right, the next slide is our, yes, Phil.
Obviously, we've had issues in the past. Historically, we were always trying to make Illinois Terminal pay for itself, and I think we broke off of that a couple of years ago. But the reason, if I remember, we broke off of it was we were really struggling to retain people at Illinois Terminal. I know we've got fewer senior employees than we used to have, so maybe that helps, but we are giving some of the people who are here some level of cost of living increase this year, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
where are we at on that?
Yeah. Everybody organization-wide gets the cost of living increase. We have been making strides to go above and beyond that with the Illinois Terminal. We're not doing that this year, primarily just because we have some financial concerns with state funding and federal funding, but so we're just trying to take a little more conservative approach to it. But yes, they all get the cost of living increase like everybody else does. I do want to say too, relative to the team that is here right now, Josh Dahm, our Illinois Terminal Director, does a great job. We've got a really good team. We have still had turnover. Just as a for instance, we had an opening in operations department, and so our excellent supervisor that reports to Josh left Illinois Terminal because she applied for that position, and so we retained the employee, but she moved into another department, which created another opening here at Illinois Terminal, and we actually just filled that position. So I haven't met the new supervisor yet, but I've been hearing great things about her. So yeah. That answer your question? Okay. All right, moving on to this screen. This is, we have expenses that are not eligible for the state grant that we receive, that we affectionately call DOAP. It's DOAP, and that stands for Downstate Operating Assistance Program. So we just shorten that to DOAP. Everybody in the state does that. It's not just us goofy people in Champaign. And whoop, can we go back a slide, Tech? Thank you. So these expenses are not eligible for state reimbursement through DOAP. And that is primarily because they are expenses that aren't related to public transit. So we do some things that aren't transit related. For instance, we operate this building and we have tenants in this building, and so the utilities that go to those tenants, or if something needs to be repaired, you know, we do things to maintain quality infrastructure and facilities in this community, but not all of them are eligible for state expenses. So that's all this screen is. Okay. Now you can move on to the next one, Tech. All right, now we get to some of the interesting stuff, the capital projects. And so this will help explain that very first page that we had some things looking strange for. So this is that debt service section of projects. All of these projects programmed here would be on that debt service, so we would borrow the funds to do the project. That principal and interest becomes eligible for an operating expense, and therefore the state grant. And so we only borrow that money for the period of time it takes to complete the project. So if a project takes 2 months to do, then we would borrow that money for 2 months and then pay it off at the end of the 2 months. If it takes 1.5 years to do, we would borrow the money for 1.5 years and pay it off at the end of the project. So different projects take a different amount of time. The one I want to really highlight on here is the one at the bottom, the hydrogen station expansion and 10 hydrogen buses. This is the grant program that we know we can pay for the project through with debt service. You'll see that same project show up again in another section. It's a federal capital grant project, and the state grant pays for 65% of expenses. The federal grant pays for 80%. So we're hopeful that we will get the federal grant because that will pay for 80% of the cost versus 65%. But we have it reflected here twice. And again, I'll just repeat, we're not going to do the project twice, we're only going to do it once, but it's reflected here so that it can be approved in either program that we end up using. Does that make sense? Okay. Moving on. There you go. I underlined it in red just to really double down on that. Okay, this next one is local capital. So this is our local capital reserve. No grant funds. These are 100% local capital expenditures. I want to I'm going to try to just list a couple of the projects so that you hear them and you know what you'll be approving with the budget, but and I can answer any questions about them, or we can bring Ashley up or Josh to answer questions. We can do whatever you need, but I'm going to list them pretty quickly, so stop me if you hear something you have a question about. In the shelters, kiosks, stops, and associated work line item, that generally pays for concrete pads and shelters, wayside signs, and kiosks. The miscellaneous facility improvements, that pays for things like equipment repairs and upgrades at Illinois Terminal, well, at all of our facilities. We're going to add a split level cooling system to this floor, the banquet facility. That is not eligible for any federal or state grants because this is a banquet facility, and although we use it for board meetings, it's not technically a transit asset, so we'll pay for that out of local dollars rather than using federal or state. Josh has requested that we add an emergency backup power to the elevators, which is a fantastic idea, and I think sometimes I wonder how that didn't get included with the original construction, but here we are 25 years later, and we're going to add that emergency power to the elevators here at Illinois Terminal. And then last month you approved phase 1 of the shop grates, the floor grates in the storage facility, and in this line item is phase 2 for that project. The maintenance shop equipment, we're going to finish out the fall protection that we have in the maintenance department, and they want to buy a tire machine. And the software system upgrade, that primarily is the project that I mentioned earlier, the vehicle connectivity, so the cellular. That is for the equipment. That other line item in the maintenance budget is for the equipment in the vehicle, but there's some software that we need to upgrade in that system, the real-time information, the vehicle tracking system, and that software isn't an operating expense, so we'll pay for that out of this budget. And then I'll just highlight under the architectural and engineering services, that's a big jump. You haven't seen that number in that line item before, and that is because I'm very hopeful in relatively short order that we'll be able to sign a contract with Stantec for the Illinois Terminal expansion for the first phase of their work once we get the cost sharing aspect worked out with the development partners, and so we are moving ahead with that. Phil, just as a side note, we just signed today the contract with CBRE, so we finally got it signed. It was a little more painful than it needed to be, but we got there, and so I think we're really going to be racing ahead with that now. Okay, that was a lot. If there are any questions on that, though, we can move on to the next section, which is the federal capital grant funded projects. And this is where you'll see, if you hit next again, I think we'll see a red line pop up. Yep. This is where the hydrogen station shows up again. And so we'll drop it off the program that we don't use, and it will only remain in the budget with the funding source that we do use. And actually, even the Urbana downtown development and the Illinois terminal expansion, we're not going to spend this money this year, but they're in here so that we can apply for grants. Ashley is working on a grant right now for the Urbana downtown development, so it's important for it to be reflected in the budget as a project that the board has approved and is supportive of. Okay, next slide. All right, this is federal capital grant funded projects at 100% level. These are the last two projects that are paid for with our COVID relief funding that we received. And so once these projects are complete, we'll be done with the COVID relief funding, and fingers crossed you'll never see pandemic relief funding again come across your eyes. Though we very much have appreciated this funding, and it's allowed us to do a lot of work and survive the pandemic. So it was good. And then one final slide. This is our solar array expansion, which you approved many months ago. And we sit here today still waiting for the concurrence letter from IDOT, the Illinois Department of Transportation, allowing us to award the contract that you approved many months ago to the contractor. The contractor has been very good to us and understanding that we're sitting here banging our heads against the wall trying to get this concurrence letter from the state. Ashley frequently is emailing and calling the state to try to get this letter. There's no problem with the project. There's no problem at all. It's just the state is short-staffed, I guess, and they are really struggling churning through the work they have on their desk, and that includes our project, this project and a couple of other projects that we're waiting on concurrences for. So hopefully in this next fiscal year, we'll actually be able to begin this solar array. This is on the 803 garage, the newer portion of the garage that doesn't currently have an array on it. So hopefully we get there. All right, that is my spiel for the budget, and I'll take any questions. Phil.
Two for you. The Intelligent Transportation System software upgrade, was that one of the software upgrades you mentioned earlier? What is that exactly?
No, that's a different one. The one I mentioned first was, they actually are related to each other, Phil, so you're connecting dots that are appropriate to be connected, but the one I mentioned earlier was under just local capital, and the line item is software systems, upgrades, procurements, so that's about midway through the page that you're looking at.
Yeah,
and then this one towards the bottom, the ITS system, that's actually the whole system that we have, the CAD AVL system, and this is upgrading to the newest version of that, and it's been in the budget for actually several years, and we will actually be finishing it this coming year. So that project has been underway, but it has taken an extremely long time to get here, but it's just upgrading it to the newest version of the system.
This is the back office thing you were talking about.
No, oh, sorry, no, those are two dots that shouldn't be connected. It's not the enterprise software like the finance software or the work order software. This is specifically to the tracking of the vehicles and our control center.
All right, sorry about that. I'm a little slow sometimes.
No, I'm throwing a lot at you, so no worries.
On the solar array expansion, I don't know if it would help them move any faster, but there are some rumblings in Washington that might be lending some urgency to the situation if they do cancel any tax credits for anything that doesn't commence construction within 90 days with this big, beautiful bill. That could definitely be a problem for us. So if there's any strings we can pull and say, hey, you know, if you're going to do one of these next, this could potentially get killed if the federal government decides to change their programs.
Yeah, we're aware of that. I mean, we are trying to communicate all these danger signs to IDOT. I mean, the most. I mean, that you're right, but even more worrisome than that is that the bid, the proposal that the contractor gave us was actually only good for 90 days. And we are, excuse me just a moment, how many months? 7.5? 5.5, but we're 5.5 months past, but they have told us that they're willing to hold on to it. That's not going to be indefinite, and so we need to get this concurrence from IDOT, and it is just like pulling teeth.
I'm assuming you guys have poked the state senators, state reps to poke IDOT already. I'm sure you tried that.
We've had lots of conversations with a variety of people higher up at IDOT and legislators and our state association. Phil, every single transit agency in the state is experiencing the exact same struggle. So it's not just us, they're not picking on us, it's a statewide problem. And, I think on the days that I want to be fair to IDOT, I would say I think they truly are inundated with work, and they don't have enough people to get through it in appropriate time. So that's my effort to be fair to them. My criticism is, you can't just start at the top of the pile and work your way down. Some things in the middle of the pile maybe should have a higher priority and get moved to the top of the pile, and they don't seem to do that. So that's my criticism on my days that I don't feel like being fair to them.
Anything further?
If I may.
Paul?
Thank you. There are two items related to the hydrogen direction, the station and the buses. I'd like to discuss them separately, and let me start out by saying I realize that this is a singular point of view, but I think it's my job to give my point of view. So in the April 2024 board meeting, there was a zero emission transition plan presented. And in that plan, there's a figure that outlines bus purchases. So in 2024, the purchases are 10 fuel cells and 26 diesel electric. And indeed, those in fact were authorized for purchase. And in 2025, the figure shows, the figure shows 10 diesel electric buses to be purchased, and last February, the board authorized the purchase of 8. Then in 2026, 2027, and 2028, the plan shows no purchases of buses at all. And then in 2029, there are bus purchases again. So it seems to me that these purchases for 10 fuel cell buses weren't in the zero emission transition plan. Also, 10 more buses would definitely raise the spare ratio beyond the recommended of the FTA. So I think we should discuss why these bus purchases are here.
I am not sure what chart you're looking at. I was trying to look at the screen here to see which one it was, but I don't think that's the overall transition. Actually, can you pull it up on the left?
I can, and I will say the transition plan is a requirement of our low and no emission applications each year. So we produce.
Could you use a microphone, please?
She is.
Thank you.
Paul, if you turn yours off,
yeah, you'll be able to
your speaker will turn on.
So the transition plan is a requirement of our low and no emission bus grant applications every year. And last year we submitted an application for our station expansion, and so we updated our transition plan. The plans are often outdated almost as soon as we submit them because conditions change. The 8 that were approved in February are expansion buses, but the 10 that Carl is referring to on this year's budget are actually replacement buses. So they wouldn't expand the fleet, they would just replace 10 buses that have reached the end of their useful life. So in that case, it wouldn't impact our spare ratio. But to your point about the transition plan, we update that every year when we submit a new grant application to capture any new changes. So for instance, when we made that transition plan, the expansion was not anticipated at that time. That's happened since. So all of those numbers will change in the next couple months. And in fact, we have a meeting, Josh and I have a meeting, I think on Friday, to talk about our new transition plan with our consultants that help us with our zero emission program. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but if you have any follow-up, I'm happy to try to address them.
Well, of course, all I know is what I read in the papers. And if there's a new update to the zero emission transition plan, as there was from 2023 to 2024, from 2022 to 2023, then it would be lovely to see the update from 2024 to 2025 before we consider putting buses in the budget. And I say, I appreciate that this is a singular point of view, but that's my point of view.
Phil?
And Paul, I do think we covered this to some degree just in passing with some previous meetings, and some of this falls on me. You've been to the meetings. I decided basically to bring up the issue of fairness with annexations. So we've taken on some annexations, and then we're also prospectively looking at serving the Carl Clinic over on Curtis, which I think was wholly unexpected. I kind of took some initiative and pushed the envelope with that. I still think for good reason, but to some degree, I think that probably was unexpected by the staff when they were coming up with these plans in 2024. That wasn't something that they initiated. That was something that I initiated into a larger extent by concurring with me, guys, and which I appreciate. You also, all of us on the board at the time, helped to throw a wrench in your transition plan, so to speak. And then on the flip side of this, I'm very excited about hydrogen, and I think part of what Jay had mentioned a few months ago was that we are getting better uptime than we were on these buses, but when we expand the hydrogen station, which is a part of this, it's not just purchasing more buses, that's going to increase our redundancy. It's going to give us another avenue for purchasing hydrogen rather than just producing it on site, which should increase our reliability for the hydrogen buses that we have and the hydrogen buses we acquire, which I think is really important. Because we don't want to have a situation where that station goes down because we don't have redundancy, and then we have 12 buses out of service. That could put us in a real bad way. So, again, I don't know if that was something we went over at a meeting or if something I just bothered Jay about. That's sort of my take on it, is I don't think this totally came out of left field. I think they've kind of been talking about it, but also some of it is we've thrown a wrench in their zero emissions plan by changing some of the priorities that we feed to staff. So,
if I may respond to that, what Phil was discussing were issues that were in the February board meeting. So on the matter of future annexations, if all 7 of the areas annexed were in fact annexed, then we would increase the service area of the MTD by 0.9 square miles out of 61 square miles, so that's an increase of 1.5%. And all of those annexed areas are close to services already. So I feel that the argument to buy more buses based on annexations is extremely weak. Secondly, on the matter of future service, the one route that I've heard talked about is expanding into Carl at the Fields. And then you could ask the question, so how many more buses do you need for one route? And that's an operations question, but I would be shocked if that number were 10 or 8. Maybe I could believe 4.
If I could just clarify really quickly, so the 10 buses in the budget are not expansion buses, they're replacement buses. The 8 expansion that were approved in February, those do address the annexations, 2 of which accommodate the Carls at the field service, just 2 additional buses. The other 6 are essentially to increase our spare ratio and help out the maintenance team. But I also wanted to add, with the transition plan itself, that is just a snapshot in time, and it's not policy. And so, like I mentioned, it does kind of expire as soon as we submit it, because conditions are constantly evolving. And so we don't have to necessarily, we're not beholden to it. It adapts as we adapt. And we can have a further conversation about the information that goes into that plan and how it's updated, if you would like, at a future meeting or at a separate meeting. But I will defer to the rest of the board at this time.
I think I've expressed my opinion on that matter as well as I can. So the second issue is the request for funding for the hydrogen station expansion. And this is not a new request. It appeared in the April 22 board meeting. It appeared in the April 2024 board meeting, and here it is again. So serendipitously, I happen to be in the facilities subcommittee. So last May 7th, I got to see this budget. And that gave me some time to think about the hydrogen station expansion. As Phil pointed out, or maybe he didn't exactly say this, so I'll just say it myself, the current hydrogen station has had operational difficulties. The report that we have say that its uptime is like 66%. And I asked at that May 7th meeting, do we have a design? And Carl responded to me, we have a concept of a design. Again, it's a singular point of view, but my point of view is that the board should act upon designs and not, quote, concepts of designs. So there are some 40 transit districts that have hydrogen fueling stations. Many of them in California, many of them receiving liquid hydrogen from tankers, and several of these districts have extensive descriptions of their facilities along with construction and maintenance costs. So I found the transit districts, a number of them, to be very useful. And I think that it would be important for the board to consider a design. Now, I appreciate that there is a desire to apply for grants. And if I read the Federal Register correctly, the deadline for that application is in fact July 14th. So it's quite possible for the board to receive a presentation on the June meeting at the end of the month of a design of the hydrogen facility. And it's also possible that the board could modify a budget. So at this point in time, without a design, which actually shows where this project is going, I feel I can't support this.
Point of order, is there an action item related to the budget, or it's just a presentation? Got it.
No, I appreciate there's no action item, but every year following the budget presentation, the board is presented with a budget, and that will be an action item. Right. And if this sits as it is, the way it is, I doubt seriously that I could vote for that.
Anything further? Go ahead, Phil.
even if we were to include this in the budget, you would still need board approval in order to move forward with a design, right?
That's correct. Approving the budget, the budget is a plan, and approving the budget does not commit you to the project, because you would be approving the contracts for the work. And Paul, if I may, I'd like to offer a correction. I actually never said I had a concept. I said we were working on functional specifications, not technical specifications.
I disagree with that.
Well, I appreciate that, but what we're doing is a design build, and so when we select a contractor, the contractor will complete the design of the project. And in order to qualify for a design build, we can only design up to a certain percentage. Ashley, is that 30%?
According to the state, that's 30%, but it's actually not defined clearly.
Okay, we're shooting for a 30% design for the with the functional specifications, so that the contractor would do the rest of the design. That's the concept of a design build, and that's as we sit here today, that's the plan for completing this project.
One of the transit systems that has detailed information on its direction allocated $300,000 for a design, and I think it would be appropriate to have that number in the budget. And considering, you know, I would like to see in the budget money allocated to getting the current hydrogen station operating better.
Well, only putting $300,000 in would not allow us to apply for the grants that we're applying for to fund this project. So what we're trying to do by having it in the budget is also it's included in our metropolitan planning organization's transportation improvement plan, and that those two elements allow us to apply for the funds through the grant programs. So just putting $300,000 in would not allow us to complete the activities that we're trying to line up the funding for. I don't know what transit district you're talking about that had designed by $300,000, but my guess is that would have been also a design build, and that they did early design work up to a percentage, whatever that state allows them to do for design build, and then the contractor completed the rest of the design for it.
This number, $10 million, in fact, is not unusual for a system that may have as many as 50 buses. So it's not the $10 million that I find that shouldn't be here. It's the fact that we do not have a design.
Sorry, what $10 million are you talking about?
Well, I'm doing the arithmetic of saying $23 million for both the buses and the station. I subtract 10 times 1.2 for the buses, I get $11 million for the station.
Okay.
I mean, Dick and Carl and Paul, for that matter, I don't have detailed plans on what the Illinois terminal expansion is going to look like, and I have nothing on the Urbana downtown development. We could take those off of here as well and say that we're not going to add them into the budget until we've got a better idea of what they're going to look like. But I think some of this is, we're putting numbers in a budget as sort of a placeholder, and some of these items will actually appear year after year until we lock down funding and get all of the associated things figured out. It doesn't mean that we're committing, you know, to do this. It's just in the budget, and obviously if we can get a federal grant that covers, you know, 80% of it, it certainly makes it more attractive than if we don't. But we're not committing ourselves.
I don't know about submitting grants to FTA at all. but I have submitted grants to NSF, DOE. One of the DOE grants was for $50 million. And I assure you that having a complete design was a crucial part in winning that grant.
Anyone else? Carl?
I'll just say that's not a requirement for this grant program. We do not have to submit a complete design plan for the project. We didn't do that with the first phase with the station. The station was designed once we had the funds lined up to pay for the project. I'm not familiar with your grant program, and our grant program is different from the one that you've got experience with. That's not a requirement. And I also would like to say, you are absolutely correct that we have had challenges with the first phase of the station. There has been more downtime on the hydrogen production than we would have liked to have been. I will say, however, that roughly since January, Josh can correct me with exact dates, but January, February, March, April, and May, we've had exceedingly good uptime with the station, and so I think we have gotten to the point where most of the wrinkles have been ironed out. We knew that there would be wrinkles and that there would be downtime, and we are doing something that not many people are doing around the globe, and so there are challenges associated with that, and we think that we've finally gotten on top of most of them.
I think I've expressed to the board, I'm doing my best to try to understand this complicated situation. And I only received earlier in the month the proposal from Trillium, and it's interesting reading. For example, the proposal does say that the station will have the ability to take hydrogen delivery from tanker trucks. But I think I heard last February that the station doesn't have that ability. So it's a singular point of view, but it's my point of view.
You're talking about the proposal for the existing station, right?
No, I'm referring to my desire to see the existing station operate better.
Got it.
And there's two things it could do. It could get the facility to take hydrogen delivered from tanker trucks. It could put a compressor post-storage before the dispenser so that all of the hydrogen that's in storage could be delivered to the buses. If I understand the numbers right now, only 30% of the hydrogen that's in storage can be delivered to a bus. So I think those two improvements would help greatly the existing station. George?
I move to close debate on this subject.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded.
Aye.
Point of order, there's no motion on the floor. Therefore, asking for debate to be closed by this mechanism is inappropriate.
I'll withdraw my second on that.
But I'll shut up.
That's fair. I'll say something I probably shouldn't, but Josh, do you think you could maybe give us just a one-page sort of, we might communicate with email and see if we can get something in the managing director's report next month to kind of give us some ideas of what's going on with this?
If I may, staff has already committed to doing a presentation at the July board meeting on this topic. We've communicated that to Trustee Dubevic and the chair and the vice chair. So we've committed to that. We are working on a presentation. Would that satisfy your request, Phil?
I'll defer to Paul on that. It's only the problem with when the presentation is going to be before us. It's going to be before us before we're asked to vote upon the budget next month.
No, it would be at the July board meeting.
I misspoke. So the presentation on the direction of the hydrogen facilities is in July, but we will be asked to vote on this budget a month before that.
That's correct.
But it would not commit us to the bus purchase or the hydrogen expansion. It only gives us the option to later on approve them.
That is also correct.
Enough is enough. If you don't think my motion was in order, I will offer this fact. If we don't stop this debate, I'm going to walk out and deprive the board of a quorum.
Dick, can I motion to just adjourn the meeting? Are we through? So moved.
Now, before that, I need to tell you that the regular Board of Trustees meeting and public hearing on the fiscal year 2026 budget and appropriation ordinance will be on Wednesday, June 25th, 2025 at 3 p.m. here at the Illinois Terminal, 45 East University in Champaign. I did hear a motion to adjourn this meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned.